Sonic 2, the official movie prequel. Sonic's locked in a vault and can't get out. It cuts back in time to 12 hours earlier, where a woman named Maddie says she has to get to the clinic and hopes Sonic will stay out of trouble until Tom and Wade get back from their trip. Is she justified in trusting him to stay out of trouble? Or should she really know better? Sure, teens are too old to be babysat, but I feel like she should know better if she's even saying this. Sonic says while clearly kidding himself that he's got no problem being alone because he's dealt with it for most of his life, which is something the movies have going for them as something unique because Sonic has that problem as well as Knuckles. Even if it's not that unique if another character did it. He says he can't take this anymore after 7 minutes. He says 7 whole minutes. And it feels like someone would say this if they were genuinely upset instead of just making a self-deprecating joke. It seems more like the writer's just making fun of him. Sonic must be joking when he tells the dog not to tell anyone he's gonna leave home, because he should know he can't talk. He decides to go to the town that's coincidentally named Green Hills. And Sonic's narration says that the citizens there love him, but then goes on to say that the only folks he can interact with are the ones he makes himself out of snow. He thinks that some of them still think he's an escaped government experiment or mass hallucination. There's no way someone would be such an idiot as to think the latter is true. It's implied that he's stealing food from a high-end eatery and does that all the time. And he's totally fine with this, even though he doesn't have to steal now. So that's certainly different. He must be joking when he says he's slipping in his old age. Sonic wastes a bunch of my time with boring dialogue and complains that he's bored too, and then he assumes that a fishing trip would be boring, which explains why he didn't go with Tom there. Then the story shows us some robbers doing a holdup at gunpoint with realistic guns. Like in the Knuckles comic, but even more realistic because they're humans. But I guess every Sonic fan was okay with this while demonizing it in that comic, because this comic is recent and written by someone else. One of the robbers says someone's coming with him to the vault and wants to find something. He's happy to find a Robotnik control glove with the hardware to tap into his network, like the client promised. Is he Agent Stone or the client? I didn't watch the movie. That's a problem when you have a human character. They don't have remotely distinct and memorable character designs. He talks like an unrealistic cartoon villain when he says that doesn't mean they can't sow a little mayhem before turning it over to him. Why is technology this rare in a safety deposit box in the bank instead of being used by the government or military? Sure, it's a shame that it's in this place, just so that it can be stolen easily. Then after my time is wasted with uninteresting boredom, where someone's stupid enough to think he could ask the government to buy them a police chopper, Tom and Wade get a police call about a bank robbery we saw earlier, and it cuts back to Sonic. Did we really need to see that scene? Sonic's back home already, because apparently he missed being indoors that much. And I guess watching TV can alleviate loneliness a little bit. He sees a news report about the bank robbers, so he's happy that he'll be able to do something about it. A robber wonders where the escape route is because the cops have the bank surrounded already. And the brown-haired guy annoys me by saying bro, and says he's activating the work of a genius and it takes time. Not necessarily. If Eggman was even smarter, it wouldn't take this much time. The glove says it's scanning for local assets, as I'm just thinking that the concept of a technological glove rips off Starline's gloves a little. The redhead from earlier gets reassured by Sonic, who hasn't just decided on the blue blur for a superhero name and considered Super Streak instead. The name's lampshaded, and he wastes some more time bragging before finally telling her to point him in the direction of the vault. He gets shocked, and the redhead grabs him and talks like she's actually with the bad guy, saying that Jason screwing around has blown her cover and attracted a mutant. She tells Jason off for calling her honey, so they're not dating, and she tells someone about Sonic, assuming that someone sent him to her for no reason. She's told he wants more money to have him delivered to him, as I'm thinking the story's boring from having a needless amount of dialogue without being interesting enough. So Jason says he's got it, and some flying airships get sent out. We see Sonic in the vault like he was at the start of the story, and he freaks out and says he's either being airlifted or falling. As I'm wondering what's going on, the redhead says, "Oh my god," which got controversy when Amy said in Sonic Heroes. Jason says they should forget the buyer, and says that they'll make way more money from this thing than he was paying by stealing the vault. Sonic says if the bad guys want the vault, he'll have to take it for a spin. And the humans outside run for cover as there's a blue tornado above the bank. But then Sonic ends up lying on the floor, and decides to do a spin dash. He wastes time threatening in front of the robbers, and it's lampshaded that he's just buying the bad guys time. Then a fishing rod gets cast and ties around a metal thing, and two flying machines crash into each other, blowing up. That's a cool, unique use of the rod, but he's doing something big the cat could have done too if he were here. So it's not showing me how it can be useful in a way only he could. Not to mention it might be a 1 in a million shot. Sonic wastes more time talking and then moves around quickly, saying that they'd never get the chance to fire. Don't have him say that because that just draws attention to the fact that they would have shot him already. They already had a chance to fire. He attacks them, and then gets told they read about the glove on the dark web, conveniently for them. A flying robot threatens Sonic, and the redhead says "sick him," with the writer somehow spelling it wrong. Then the flying robot steals the glove instead of obeying her. Sonic tells people to do him a favor and leave him out of it when they talk to the news because he wants a low profile. He must not be aware that banks had cameras. So he would have been caught on camera, and nobody would think he's just a hallucination anymore. Somehow he goes from saying that to telling the robbers to tell criminals in prison how cool he is. Tom has some stilted dialogue where he admits he has no jurisdictional authority here for no reason and still expects the robbers to surrender, without saying he's making a citizen's arrest. Sonic sees the redhead in the air above him and catches her to save her. And I'm with her when she tells him to stop talking. Yeah, he talks way too much. The flying robot drops something off via parachute in front of what I assume is Agent Stone. It's at least entertaining that Wade really wants to take a robot down with the boomerang, wanting excitement instead of being afraid of robots. But anyone would know that you can't hurt a robot with a blow dart. Tom decides to keep this quiet from Sonic because he assumes he had started a mess by tracking down Robotnik's technology. Then a cop wants to offer them food as thanks, and it turns out the donuts were stolen by Sonic. Our hero. I've already seen this kind of behavior with Manic, and at least it was in character for him. The next story has all of the narration and black text boxes annoy me. So I'd rather just ignore it after the first page because I hate it and that's all there is to say about it. So Agent Stone goes to become a barista, and someone behind the counter insists on rubbing it in that the pay is terrible with no benefits, for some reason. And the assistant manager insists on saying that he gets a cut of all the tips to rub it in some more, because the writer wants you to hate them. So they're portrayed as confusingly mean. It's not like they know who he is. He makes a stupid mistake of telling someone that he made their drink with goat's milk, and she spits it at him because it tastes bad to her. If it weren't for the fact that she was called Karen, I want to know that's supposed to be a woman even with the long hair. Someone working beside him tried to cheer him up by saying he could listen to his podcast to feel better. But Stone just talks in an unrealistically pretentious way, making me wonder why anyone likes him as a character. And someone tells him to cover a shift for him. He agrees. We see some dangerous robots behind her as she thinks of him as a sucker because she lied about having to go to a family thing for a day off. And on Monday he gets given her a job because she's disappeared. I assume she got killed. And that's obviously disproportionate retribution. The manager goes out of his way to threaten Stone with no provoking. So he's punished for his bullying tendencies by being kidnapped by flying robots. Stone gets told that it's up to him to pick up the slack. And he's told that she doesn't want to see production slow down, an unrealistic expectation. Finally, Karen gets arrested by people in black suits after how annoying she was being. She says she can't be money laundering because she runs a coffee shop, saying freaking. It's constantly interesting to me that the issue gets away with minor curse words in the Sonic series, first screwing around to now this. These are all words we never saw in the series before. Then she's told in prison that incoming or not, the phone call counts as her one call. Huh? Is that forced drama? She's told that an anonymous tip proved that her crimes were an open and shut case. If an anonymous tip alone doesn't make sense as something that would actually prove that, if she's not actually guilty of that, then it would have been better writing if she was guilty of those crimes. At least the story doesn't have the nice one get punished. Stone has a pretentious looking item on the menu as he plans on installing new equipment. In the next story, Knuckles thinks that Sonic's the reason he's investigating the most desolate corners of the galaxy. So he can travel from planet to planet now? How would he know it's desolate? He'd need advanced ancient technology from the Echidnas to travel to other corners of the galaxy. Well, a teleportation device would count as that. But I was just thinking about a spaceship. No, that would have been creative. He thinks Sonic's his one chance to restore what was lost. If by what was lost he means the Echidnas, why would he think Sonic could bring back the Echidnas? The inconvenient eruption of a volcano sends him falling, and because he's facing upwards, he's unable to glide before landing and getting hurt. He thinks of some people as scavenger scum that give his kind a bad name. Even though they're not Echidnas, right? As they leave a warp ring. Someone holds what reminds me of the Dominion Rod with a purple look, and speaks in alien language. Knuckles gets dragged off with advanced handcuffs on, which reminds me of the story advertising Sonic Chronicles. So far this is nothing new. I've already seen Knuckles wandering around on his own monologuing to himself, and Knuckles falling off a cliff. So the story should have started with him being called a challenger, because it wasn't given any indication of who these kidnappers are, and why they kidnapped him in particular. How they even found out about him and what his species is, when I would assume he spent literally all of his life on each island. I see Vector and Espio in Casino Night Zone, as the announcer tells people that the main event's about to happen in the arena for people to wager on. Well, that's new. What's also new is, Knuckles is threatened by a giant monster, even though he's in restraints. So the people who kidnapped him would know that it wouldn't make an entertaining fight to watch, unless they knew they could break free of the restraints from sheer stubbornness. What took him so long? He tries to sound badass with his lines here, and he punches the monster. But then we see him walk away with a bag of money to bribe people to help him with. I guess the writer thought it was impossible to write an interesting action scene with Knuckles, or the story wasn't given nearly enough space, because I was expecting a full action scene, not one measly punch after all of that build-up. It makes sense that if he has super strength, he could win with one punch, but it doesn't make for an entertaining fight scene. It's giant. I could have bought that it had tough enough defense that it would need more than one punch. So the story just ends here. No 10-10 explanation for why he was chosen to fight that monster. Presumably nobody would have met him. It's just there to explain away how he got this money. Why did he think he couldn't do the searching alone? He even thinks that it'd be betraying his instincts. So if you know it's out of character, don't write it. In the next story, Tails holds a scanning device and opens a warp ring to try to find him. He finds a small building and says no one's visited it for years out of respect because it's where Sonic was raised by his adoptive parent. The mortgage must have been completely paid off on that house. Otherwise, people wanting tax money would have visited it. He must be talking to himself out of prolonged loneliness. But I still don't take it as seriously when it could have easily been written to think instead of talk, and it'd feel more natural. He gets a match, and scans possible worlds, and gets some weird interference for no reason. Sonic knew to have one silent E in the picture he drew, but not another for some reason. He says that tracing a single signature across the galaxy is like looking for a needle in 10,000 haystacks, but it's narrowed it down to just a few planets. I like that he's got a backpack to keep stuff in that matches his fur. He goes to a zone that most of the civilized world avoid, but the energy here is strong. It looks like Marble Zone to me, except it's not purple. There's a creepy looking bad guy who calls this his domain and calls himself Rava, which reminds me of Rava from Legend of Korra. Tails flies over him, and he says stilted kids' villain dialogue in response. Tails figures out that's not the energy he's tracking that's causing the interference, and someone's following him. How did he figure this out? He goes through a warp ring multiple times, doing nothing in each place. So it's just there to waste space with nostalgia references. By the way, I've already seen warp rings being used as portal technology in Archie. He thinks someone's still following him, but how? I don't see anyone. It's interesting that he finds leftover chaos energy from when a place got turned into ruins. His device warns him that an intruder is imminent, so that's how he knew he was being followed. He says he's got a signature from Earth and goes through a portal. And Knuckles' minion was the one following him. What was the point of the story lasting so long? The only thing that really happened was covered in one panel. In the next story, we see Eggman stuck on a mushroom planet, boring me by talking too much in a pretentious way. Eggman's usually arrogant, but this is the first time I've thought of him as speaking pretentiously, getting on my nerves. He's supposed to be arrogant in a large ham cartoon villain sort of way. Realistically, he eats a mushroom, and it's implied to be a magic mushroom, which gets more crap past the radar. But nothing is done with it. So I guess they weren't allowed to do too much with it. But if they were, the story would have been more interesting than it is. He just says groovy when that's not like him. He finds a cave of mushrooms. At least that's new, but I wish there was barely any dialogue. His finger gets chopped on. While I do hate Eggman, I still felt bad for him. And he's surrounded. And the story takes too long for him to get threatened by a giant one. He activates a flamethrower in his wrist to defeat it, looking competent. And that's all that happens in the story. That's literally it. What was the point? How about showing us how he found the resources he needed to build stuff and get out of that place? That's what I wanted to see. This issue is by Keel Fegley. The first story had Sonic eventually see a news report about a bank robbery and break out of a vault with a tornado and spin dash, which frightens the bank robbers, who never had a chance of escaping anyways because a flying robot sent after them was programmed to steal the glove off one of them. So really, him coming here was pointless. This only serves to show us that Agent Stone got the Robotnik glove from a bank robbery he paid for. But why was it there instead of being used for its technology? It'd make more sense if he found it in Eggman's base where he used to work for him. At least something was accomplished here because Tom destroyed a few robots with a fishing rod. The story dragged itself out too long with the boring dialogue considering how basic the plot was, so at least the plot was original. The second story shows how Agent Stone gets control of a coffee shop. Lucky for us, we're given every reason to hate the various people he gets rid of with his robots. It's still mostly annoying as we have to deal with these people being jerks for the whole story. And then all we get to see from most of them is that there's robots in the same panel as them. We don't get to see any cartoon slapstick against them. So it's still not good enough. But if they're all innocent people, it would also be annoying. I hate the narration running through it. The third story explains away how Knuckles got money to bribe people into helping him look for Sonic for some reason. Because he's the last Echidna, he got kidnapped and expected to fight a giant monster in the stadium in what most would consider an impossible fight. Why would fighting arena people place bets at have a fight where it's way too obvious who's gonna win? They don't want most people winning their bets. They must have known Knuckles has super strength, so they knew it wasn't actually a guarantee that he would lose, and assumed that everyone would bet against Knuckles and lose their money. All he did was win in one measly punch, which can make sense, but seeing more of his abilities would have actually been entertaining. The fourth story is mostly a complete waste of space, only serving to explain that Tails found Sonic's DNA at his old house and that's how he tracked him down. Go figure. This one's worth it for that, but it's a bad sign when only one panel has actual plot happening, and the rest is just a waste of time where he does the same thing over and over with no progress. He goes through a warp ring a lot, visiting various places, but almost nothing happens in any of them. Does he have to talk so much during this? The fifth story has Eggman get threatened by little monsters in a mushroom cave, and finally use a flamethrower to save himself. It reminded me of pre-50s Archie Robotnik, who could fire a laser and put up a force field. Still, there was one panel worth of actual plot. I don't get to see how he started building stuff and got back to Earth, when I doubt you could make invention material out of mushrooms. Wouldn't the electricity burn up the mushroom? It was just a waste of time where he talks too much in a pretentious, arrogant way until he finally does something cool. My biggest problem with the issue is that there's way too much dialogue, making for a boring experience. It's a good thing there's still new things happening to add to the series a lot, because that makes it worth it. For example, I love that there's monsters in the issue in the stories that take place on Mobius. This comic could have used a lot of trimming down for pacing issues.